Mr. Goudie, please. First witness.
Thank you, my lord. Mrs. Paget, please.
Put your right hand, face the register, please.
You swear the evidence to be given by you to the court and the jury sworn touching the matters in question between the parties shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you.
Yes, I do.
There is a seat there, Mrs. Paget. Use it if you wish.
Thank you.
It's Doris Paget,
Yes, that's my name, Doris Paget.
and you're the plaintiff in this action.
Yes, I am.
And following the death of your husband, you were appointed the executrix of his estate.
Yes, that's right.
Perhaps, my lord, my friend won't mind me leading insofar as the vital statistics are concerned.
Of course not.
Thank you. Proceed, please.
You were born, I believe, on the 5th of November, 1926,
Yes.
so that you're now 46.
Yes.
And your husband, Robert Paget, was born the 1st of July, 1924, and had he lived, he would be 48.
Yes, that's right.
You were married, I think, on the 8th of January, 1946,
Yes.
so that you would have been married approximately 26 years.
Yes, going into the 26, yes.
You had 2 children, a son, Robert,
Yes.
born the 28th of May, 1950, now 22,
That's
and a
right.
daughter, Carol Doris, born the 7th of June, 1954, and she's now 18.
That's right.
Lord, I left with the registrar before the opening appropriate documentation to support these various statistics, and I would ask leave to file them pursuant to the enabling provisions of the Ontario Evidence Act.
These are all.
Very well.
There is their letters probate, a birth certificate with respect to each of the Pagets, a marriage certificate, and a death certificate bearing out
Copy of the letters probate. I think, gentlemen, they could all be in as one exhibit. I don't see any need to make separate exhibits up.
Fine,
Very
Lord.
well. A documentation will be exhibit number 1, Mr. Registrar.
I intend to file, my lord, a list of the special damages. There were a few minor corrections that are required to be made, and perhaps I could undertake to file them with you before the end of the trial.
Yes, certainly.
These two are the.
Thank you.
We're concerned, as you're aware, Mrs. Paget, with the accident that occurred last February 9th.
Yes.
And as at that time, you had been married to your husband for, I think you said 26 years.
That's right.
Were those happy years?
Oh, I'll never forget them.
You'd always,
Happiest years of my life.
you'd always lived together from the time of your marriage until
Yes.
your husband's unfortunate death. I'd like to talk briefly about the 2 children, if I might, first. Your son, Robert Jr., is, I think, in his 3rd medical year.
At the University of Toronto, yes.
Is he doing well?
Yes, I'm very proud of him, and I know his father would be. Yes, he's doing quite well.
What hopes has he, if he has discussed them with you, as to his future beyond medical school?
Well, when my husband was living, of course, we planned great things for our children, and we certainly hoped he'd go on and take postgraduate course, and I certainly intend to follow out my husband's wishes the best I can.
And in keeping with that wish, during the time that your husband was alive and part of the family, did he contribute toward your son's tuition, or did the boy take care of that himself?
Oh, no, my husband contributed. My son would be, as both children would, in the summertime, take odd jobs to have extra money. But no, my husband
Your husband
certainly did, yes.
took care of the bulk, I take
That's
it,
right,
of that
yes.
expense. And if the case had been, as you have indicated your son hopes, that he goes on to postgraduate work, would your husband, if he had lived, have continued to pay the tuition?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt of that, yes.
What was the relationship
Excuse me, my lord. Mr. Goudie. Lord, I have no objection to my friend leading when he was dealing with vital statistics, and it was only with respect to them that he requested the permission, my lord. Now he's getting into very important questions on which he is leading him.
So I'd ask you not to lead now, Mr. Goudie.
Thank you, Lord.
please.
Was your son living at home as of the time of your husband's death?
You mean at the very time of the death?
Yes.
Or all during, before
Throughout
that?
the school year and up to that time?
No, he wasn't. He was living at school.
Right. And what of the cost of his board at school?
Well, since my husband always took care of all those matters, I think, and I'm just guessing at this point, that it would be like about $2,500 or something like that.
Whatever that amount was, I take it from what you've said that your husband paid that in addition
Oh,
to the
yes.
tuition.
Yes.
What was the relationship between father and son?
Oh, extremely close. The whole family was a very united family. This is why this death's been a very big shock, because it's not only taken my husband, it's taken a wonderful father from the children.
Insofar as the usual types of expense were concerned, beyond those directly referable to university, clothing, things of that order, did your son look after himself, or was that a matter that your husband also looked after?
I would say any money that my son made would just be extra money that he would, whatever he wanted to buy or whatever he would want to do. I'd say my husband looked after the children.
And was there any arrangement whereby an allowance was paid, as is sometimes the case with children?
Yes, there was.
And I'd like to...
He had to work for that allowance, though, I must say this, with chores, like helping with the gardening or whatever around the house.
And did he do that willingly?
Well, can we say how, you know, how willing children are? Yes,
A normal teenager.
that's right.
Then, dealing with your daughter, Carol,
Yes, Carol Dars.
she's now 18,
Yes.
and in what year of her education?
Well, she's just finished grade 13, so this coming fall and winter she'll be entering the university.
So that at the time of your husband's death, she was still in high school.
Yes.
Had you discussed with your husband whether or not, so far as you were concerned, your daughter could continue to university if she felt she should?
Well, certainly in planning, this is exactly what we'd want our daughter to do, is to go to the university. And knowing what children are like, there's no way we knew that we could decide for her, but certainly this is what we planned, and we felt that this is what she would do.
And what were your husband's plans, assuming that Carol wanted to go to university, in terms of whether he would pay her tuition and, if need be, her board at some other college?
I don't think there'd be any question about it. He'd have to, because my daughter wouldn't have, where would she get the money?
Has your daughter decided to go to university this
Yes,
fall?
yes.
Has she been accepted?
Yes, she has.
At
She's going
what
to go
university?
to the University of London.
At London, Ontario?
Ontario.
That would be Western University,
I'm
I
sorry,
guess.
Western, yes, sorry.
And would she then be living on the campus rather
She'd
than
be
at
living
home?
away from home, yes.
And is it then, I take it from what you've said, your intention to pay her tuition and look after the board there as well?
Yes.
Now, did your daughter receive an allowance from your husband?
Yes, under the same circumstances, that they really had to do chores around the house.
And were her other necessaries looked after by him? Clothing,
Oh, yes.
dental bills,
Definitely.
the like?
Definitely. Oh, my husband looked after everything except, as I say, their extra little pin money and any money she'd make for babysitting or something like this.
And what was the relationship then between your husband and Carol?
Oh, absolutely ideal. Ideal.
I'd like to leave the children then for a moment and discuss your own background briefly. What has been your general health?
My health? Oh, I'm in perfect health.
Have you suffered any serious illnesses in the last 5 years or so?
No,
No need for hospitalization?
no, extremely healthy.
And are you presently in good health?
Oh, yes.
During the time that you were married, did you work other than as a housewife?
No, from the day we married, no, never did anything. It was my home, my husband, my children.
And are you now working other than as a housewife?
No, I'm not.
Then for a moment, I'd like to discuss you and your husband as a unit. What activities had you that you engaged in together before his death?
My husband, really, you'd have to know him to know this man. Devoted father and husband, as I say, and anything he did, he wanted to do with the family. His only outside interest would be he curled. He liked curling. The garden was the big highlight. Really, this man, I know it's hard to believe, but this man had absolutely no pleasures unless we were part of it. There aren't many men living like this, and it's sad that someone like that was taken.
Apart from the pleasures, was he did you belong with church, the two of you?
Yes, we were regular churchgoers, or children, my husband, myself.
And what about any other sort of organizations within the community? Were there any that you were both active in, or that perhaps he was alone?
Naturally, we're involved in the PTA, very much so. He belonged, now that I think of it, to an accountants association. And this would be, besides his curling, the only thing they'll say that the family wasn't involved in.
Mm-hmm.
Vacations, holidays, everything was a family unit.
You've spoken of as being a member of an accountants association. He was a chartered accountant, I think.
That's right, with the company Adams and Company in Brampton.
Adams and Company?
Yes.
And how long had he been with them?
He'd been with them, I think, about 10 years.
How did he appear to you to relate with his business associates?
You mean the men he worked with?
Yeah.
You mean how did he get along with them?
Mhm.
Everybody got along well with my husband. He was a hard-working man. He not only did his job, but he was the type that he'd go beyond the call of duty in work or as far as his home is concerned.
And was that the impression he created in the business community?
I should certainly, I don't see anybody can come up with another impression. Everybody that knew him knew that this man was a man of integrity. He took his responsibilities very seriously in his work as well. Certainly, we had, just like we'd planned for the children, there was no doubt in my mind that my husband, to me, was not only the hardest working, but brilliant in his work, and that I really felt that eventually he'd get to the top of the company.
You've spoken of your thoughts on the subject. What were his plans for the future? What were his goals in terms of the company, Adams and Company, or any other?
I never, when you say any other, I never heard him speak of any other company. It was almost as though, again, this company, Adams and Company, was like another family. Mm-hmm. And I really feel that the man never divided it, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So that he'd never leave his family, he'd never leave this company. He'd give his all to them.
Did he ever speak of what progression there might be for him, or that he thought there might be for him in that company?
Not, if you mean progression like by degrees, no, because I was the type of mind perhaps wouldn't take it in by degrees. But I knew and understood fully that he was working hard, it was a natural thing, and that perhaps he'd end up being part of the company. But mm-hmm. what steps lead to that, I, as a female mind, do not know.
I see. What had his
Excuse me,
sorry.
my lord. Excuse me, Mr. Goudie. My lord, that answer is in now. In my respectful submission, it's objectionable. as offending the hearsay rule. And I would ask, I think it arose out of the question that was asked, and I would ask my friend to try to be more careful not to ask questions which will elicit those answers.
The difficult problem in all these cases is, I think it is very relevant what his plans were. I think it's information that the jury is entitled to have. I don't know any other way it can be put in.
In my respectful submission, my lord, there are other ways that this evidence could be led, and ways which would be more properly subject to cross-examination. Surely there are still available his associates and his superiors from whom this could be obtained.
I intend, my lord, to call evidence of the sort my friend refers to. I do submit, though, that apart from the truth, if you will, of these things that I'm trying to elicit from Mrs. Paget, they are important in my submission in terms of understanding the state of the man's mind, which can only be gotten at this time, it seems to me, in the manner in which I'm attempting to approach it. I will back it up.
I think
with,
I will rule that the answer was admissible. It will eventually be a question of weight for the members of the jury to consider.
And I'll try to be careful, my lord. What was your husband's general health?
He was always healthy, this man. I really never knew him to have a sick day. Never. Other than common cold. When the flu bug was around, when one in the family got it, the rest of us got it, like
No serious
family.
illnesses?
Oh, heavens, no.
No.
None whatsoever.
No protracted treatment or
No,
hospitalization?
absolutely not. Healthiest man that ever lived.
Had he ever had to absent himself from work for long periods because of his health?
No.
How long have you lived in your present home?
On Brock Street in Brampton, we've lived there about 7 years.
And you're there still?
Yes, I am.
Was the home owned by you and your husband jointly?
Yes.
How much was it worth?
The home is worth about $25,000. It's a bungalow-style home.
And is there a mortgage on it?
Yes, there is. I think there is.
During his lifetime, did your husband attend to the mortgage payments?
Again, I only can state that my husband took care of all these matters. He handled everything so beautifully that there was never any reason for him to say, is this what we're going to do financially? He handled all of that.
Mm-hmm. You left it to him?
Excuse me?
You left it to him to do that?
Definitely, yes. I knew that he was very capable and competent.
You've spoken of his interest in the garden at the home.
Yes.
Who cares for it now?
Well, would you believe that I'm trying to do it, and the two children? We're doing the best we can with it. I think partly because, to me, it's close to my heart because it was close to my husband's heart. And that means that I'm involved in something that he dearly loved.
Have you considered hiring a gardener to take his place in the garden?
Well, as you can imagine, the whole shock and the financial situation, I should think eventually we're going to have to do something like that. But as it is now, I certainly couldn't afford it.
I'd like to turn from the family unit to consideration of the accident. And it occurred, as I understand it, the 9th of February, 1972. At about what time?
About, I think it was after 11. I think around 11:30, because we were driving home from friends who lived in Toronto.
Had you visited there for the evening?
Yes, these were friends of ours who would go off on, but they'd try to work their holidays the same time as ours occasionally. And we'd go back and forth looking at films that had been taken and slides.
You'd spent the evening at their home then?
Yes. We had dinner at our own home after my husband came home from a very hard day, as usual, hard day at work. And we had dinner. Then we went to visit our friends, the Jones's on Russell Hill Road. And we had, she's a good cook, so she always makes something. We never left there without having a casserole or sandwiches or something.
Had you anything, or had your husband anything, of an alcoholic nature to drink at your friends and
A friend's home? Yes, he did. He had a drink, perhaps a drink, maybe two. I doubt he'd even finish the second.
And what sort of a drink had he?
Rye. Not
mix?
being a drinker myself, I think it was a rye that usually he asked for.
Did he drink it as a mixed drink with water or whatever?
Oh, there'd be something in it, yes.
And what about you? Had you anything to drink?
No, I just take my glass of sherry and hold it all evening, sort of a thing.
And had he his drink or two before or after eating with the friends?
Well, we had that when we arrived. In other words, between his dinner at home and when we had our food served at our friends'. In other words, when we first arrived at their homes.
Mm-hmm. Was it fairly well on in the evening then when you left to return home?
It was after 11 or 11-ish.
Just the two of you in the car?
Yes.
Your husband driving?
Mm-hmm.
And this is his own car that you've spoken of?
Yes, this is the Monarch, I think it was.
You were traveling, as I understand it, west on number 7 highway.
Highway. Mm-hmm.
And at the place where the accident happened, is it a reasonably straight road?
Where the accident occurred? Yes.
Fairly level?
What do you mean by level?
Flat? No hills?
Oh, no, it was flat, yes.
And I understand it's a 2-lane paved highway at
Yes.
that place.
Yes.
What was the weather?
The weather was a beautiful, clear night. The moon was shining, not a full moon. I
Cold?
remember noticing patches of snow that rather would shine because of the moonlight. Not a full moon, no, but a beautiful, bright, clear night.
Visibility, then I take it, was good.
Oh, heavens, yes.
And these patches of snow that you spoke of shining, where were they?
Well, I didn't notice that really until we were driving along, and all at once the tire was going flat, or went flat, and my husband immediately pulled to the side, the right, as we're driving west.
Toward the north, then, would it?
The right.
Yes.
And I remember when he parked it and he went to get out to check the tire and to change it, this is when I noticed, I even had a little trouble opening the door and getting out on that side, and this is when I noticed the patches of snow right against, and what do you want to call it, like piles of snow, I guess, where the car was parked.
Right. Was there a shoulder on the right-hand side of the road where your husband pulled over to the
By
right?
a shoulder, you mean where this snow, where I'm talking about the snow is piled?
I'm really thinking
shoulder.
of a flat area between the pavement
Oh, yes, of course.
and the ditch,
Yes.
if there was one.
Yes.
And was this pile of snow that you speak of to the north or to the right of the vehicle when you attempted to get out the door?
It's on
Is
my
that what
side.
you're saying?
Yes.
Right.
Mhm.
Are you able to say how close the car was to that pile of snow?
Heavens, I would think almost what I would call on it, because when I opened the door, I could just about squeeze out of that car to get around to the other side.
When your husband got out of the car, having stopped it in that position, did he leave the lights on?
The lights on the car?
Yes.
Yes.
And having opened the door yourself, did you then get out?
Yes, and then I went around to the other side. The tire that blew or went flat was the rear on the left,
Right.
on the driver's side
Yes.
I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband immediately got the spare and the tools out and started to change the tire.
Yeah.
And
Did you stay outside while he changed the tire?
yes, because it was as I say, it was a lovely, delightful night, and I was in the back of the car between the two tires, wheels,
Mm-hmm.
and watched my husband, and
Did you at any time stand so as to block either of the taillights with your body?
No.
And were you still standing, as you described, when the accident happened?
Yes, I was.
What stage had your husband reached in the changing of the tire up to the moment the accident occurred?
Well, he had just changed. It was still on the jack.
I beg your pardon?
I'm sorry, my lord. It was still up on the jack, or...
Car was still up on
In other words, he was unscrewing it to get it down. When all at once, I don't know, it was just, I heard this roaring sound. And I remember seeing lights. And all I remember is my husband's body kind of flying, and the car was flying almost ahead, and then I remember lights and people and confusion.
Would you like to stop for a moment, Mrs. Paget?
Excuse me?
Would you like to stop for a moment?
No, I think I'll be all right.
Perhaps I could go
Thank you.
back just a moment in the sequence of events. The accident occurred with the vehicle still on the jack, so I take it from that your husband had jacked up the car, had then removed the flat tire,
The flat tire, he had the new tire on.
had placed the new tire on,
Yes. And was removing it, or whatever a man calls it, taking it down or trying to get the jack off.
Now, during the time that the car was stopped and that he performed those various tasks,
Yes.
did any traffic pass traveling westerly? That's the same direction that you were going.
From this way, yes, there were, at least 7 or 8 cars, because a couple of them literally stopped to offer assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband refused because it's something, as I say, he's competent in doing, and he didn't need any help, and everything was going along so well for him.
Did it appear to you that any of those passing vehicles had difficulty passing?
Passing us? No.
Now, I know it's painful for you, but I'd like to take you back to the very incident and the immediate events before it. Were you able to form any impression of the speed of the car which struck your husband?
Well, as I said, I was standing there and thinking, wasn't this a lovely evening, and we cut the tire in time, and we'll get home at a decent hour, and all I know is this speeding, roaring sound, powerful roaring sound, and then the impact with my husband. His body literally moved forward, and the car moved forward. And I'm sorry, you had to remember that this is just 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm. I won't be much longer, and I'll try as best I can to have you avoid the things that give you difficulty. Your husband was taken, I think, to hospital in Toronto, Scarborough General,
Yes, he was.
by ambulance.
Yes.
Did you go with him?
Excuse me?
Did you go with him?
Of course I did. I went along with him. I wouldn't leave my husband like that.
Was he conscious in the car, in the ambulance?
Oh. I remember. He kept repeating over and over.
Just stop a minute, please.
Um,
Is there a point to arise that I should consider in the absence of the members of the jury?
It may well be that that's so, my lord.
Members of the jury, one of those occasions has arisen again that I must ask you to retire to your jury room while I consider a point of admissibility of evidence.
Jury, please retire to the jury room.
Mr. Goudie, just based on your opening, I have difficulty seeing how anything said by him relating to the circumstances of this accident could be admissible. I gathered that there was no expectation of death until several days following the accident.
That's quite so, my lord. It's my submission that evidence of the sort, and you properly apprehend that it is a statement by him made in the ambulance about the accident, could be justified as an exception to the hearsay rule on two grounds, neither of which really relates to the question of whether it's a statement made in contemplation of death, but that there is justification, in my submission, on the strength of the case of Rex versus Buck, 1940 Ontario Reports, page 444, to justify the admission of the statement made by a person now deceased, again, not to indicate the truth of the things said, but to indicate the state of his mind and the state of mind of a participant in an accident of this case is, in my submission, relevant. I confess difficulty with the res gestae principle, but it would seem to me that this may be so inextricably bound up with the event that the words become, in that sense, a part of the event and would be justified on that basis.
I don't know who the judge was, but some famous judge, I think, made a statement to the effect that the res gestae was, put it mildly, vastly overused. I don't think that this could conceivably be part of the res gestae.
I'm in your lordship's hands. It's not a sufficiently significant piece of evidence that I want to labor the point.
I presume that you don't want this evidence in.
My lord, in seeking to keep evidence out, one always runs the risk that the jury will think that something much more important than the actual evidence in question is being kept from them. And I have frequently felt myself on the horns of that dilemma today, my lord. I'm grateful to your lordship for intervening at this point. And I think when my learned friend says that the evidence isn't of all that importance, from the point of view of showing the state of mind of the man, then your lordship must...
I don't really know what his state of mind has to do with it.
I can see none, my lord, that his state of mind would have to do with it, which makes me all the more suspicious that the purpose in seeking to lead the evidence was to get before the court something which would not be admissible. And I do object, my lord.
Mr. Goudie, if you have anything else you wish to say, I'll hear you, but I can see no basis in law for the admissibility of something that the late Mr. Paget may have said in the ambulance on the way to the hospital.
I can add nothing, my lord.
And I will rule that the words spoken by Mr. Paget are not admissible, and I would ask you to direct your examination so that you stay away from that area.
I will, my lord.
Do you ask the jury to return, please, Mr. Registrar? Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Goudie, proceed, please.
Mrs. Paget, you've told us that you went with your husband by ambulance to the hospital, and as I understand it, he was then kept there for some 2 weeks till the time of his death.
Yes, he was.
I take it that the car was damaged, and indeed there's a claim that's been admitted with respect to the damage to the car. What became of the vehicle?
I remember The insurance adjuster said he was going to take care of all that.
I see. And I think you've said that you don't now have the car.
No.
Right. Now, while in hospital,
Yes.
did you, or while your husband was in hospital, did you visit him?
I practically moved in for those 2 weeks. I hardly left his side.
Were you there then more or less on a day-to-day basis? Was he... I'm sorry. Take your time, please.
As my husband said, you know, if that fool hadn't been going so fast, you know,
Sorry.
he would be lying. When I think of this wonderful, healthy man.
I take it that he was conscious, at least at some times during his hospital stay,
Oh, yes,
for the 2
definitely.
weeks.
Excuse me, my lord, I
Members
again
of the
like to
jury,
make-
I think a matter has arisen that I'm going to have to seek the advice of counsel on, and I'd ask you to retire to your jury room again.
Jury, please retire to their
Mrs. Paget, before I hear from counsel on the legal issues involved, there's a matter I wanted to say to you, and I do appreciate the emotional strain you're under, but I made a ruling that the statements made by your husband following the accident were inadmissible. And I take it as a slip of the tongue that you made the statement about your husband's saying something about the speed that this man was driving, and I'm going to let it pass this time, but I would appreciate it if you would pay attention to the rulings that the court makes and abide by them.
I'm sorry, my lord, I didn't realize, I really didn't know what came out of my mouth that time. Sorry.
Very well. Mr.
My lord.
FitzPatrick.
My lord, I should like to renew my application to have the jury struck out and the action heard by your lordship at this time, for 2 reasons. Firstly, the witness made a statement that one of the expenses was paid by an insurance adjuster, and as your lordship knows, the question of the insurance of the defendant is not to be before the court. It's true that the witness did not state an adjuster for whom the adjuster acted, but in my submission to your lordship, the reasonable inference is that it was by an adjuster for the insurance company of the insured. Secondly, and much more importantly, my lord, the matter that your lordship has just addressed himself to, the statement of the witness, which was inadmissible, the statement that her husband had stated he wished the other vehicle had not been coming at such a high rate of speed. I'm unable to recall for your lordship the exact words, but as I recall them, they were inflammatory, they were emotional words, they implied a high and dangerous rate of speed. That inadmissible evidence is before the jury now, and in my respectful submission, nothing that your lordship can say without in any way detracting from your lordship's lucidness or eloquence can strike from their minds the effect that those words have had upon them. Your lordship's duty is to see, as well as your lordship can, that justice be done with as little emotion and fear, favor, or bias as is possible. And in my respectful submission, your lordship must weigh at this time the harm which has been done by those words against the plaintiff's recognized inherent right to have her action tried by a jury. Thank you, my Lord.
Mr. Goudie?
Lord, as to the first ground my friend raises, the matter of mention of the insurance adjuster, in this day and age, it's my respectful submission that juries are not as naive as they were about those matters at the time that the rule with respect to that problem arose. We all know, as a matter of experience, that the vast majority of drivers are insured, and that those that aren't necessarily have the fund behind them. In any case, it would be my submission that prejudice is very little likely to flow from mention of insurance. In the particular case, though, I think perhaps a more cogent reason why it ought not interfere with the continuance of the trial before the jury. I haven't an accurate note of the evidence, but it was to the effect that the car was taken care of by the adjuster. No mention of whose, no suggestion that the defendant is not going to have to pay the judgment himself. And if the jury think of it at all, surely they must think, in that the car is being claimed for still, that the defendant's adjuster had nothing to do with it, or we wouldn't be claiming it. The only logical inference to be drawn is that the adjuster was our own adjuster. And if that can hurt anyone, it must hurt the plaintiff, and I certainly don't suggest that it would. With respect to that aspect of my friend's submission, I suggest that there isn't any sound basis for taking the matter away from the jury. As to the plaintiff's unfortunate outburst, she has apologized to your lordship, and I do too. I'm sure you're aware that it, as you've said, it stemmed from the difficult emotional problem that a plaintiff has in these circumstances. It because of the emotional involvement, wasn't responsive.
Is the effect that it has on the defendant's right to a fair trial.
The burden of the evidence is yet to be before the jury. This is only one very small aspect of the plaintiff's case, or of the evidence in total. By the time all of the evidence is before the jury, it would be my submission that this will take on much less significance than it perhaps has at the moment when it's fresh in all of our minds, and that perhaps the less attention paid to it, the better at the moment, and that your lordship at the end of the day can then instruct the jury without difficulty to disregard outbursts of that sort, which can't be taken into account as evidence, and that it's unlikely that there be prejudice because of it. Those are my submissions, my lord.
Mr. FitzPatrick.
I have nothing further, my Lord.
With respect to the first ground advanced by Mr. FitzPatrick, I think there's sufficient ambiguity as to whose adjuster was looking after the car that I would be acting improperly if I struck out the jury notice on that ground at this stage of the trial. I think the problem of the mention of insurance is one that has to be dealt with in the circumstances of each individual case. And so far as I know, Bowie and Theakston has not been overruled and is still binding upon us. But in the circumstances of this particular case, I'm not satisfied that the jury would draw the inference from what was said that there was insurance to pay any judgment that they may award in favor of the plaintiff. Second ground gives me far more difficulty. I have concern as to whether there may be some prejudice to the fair trial of the defendant, but after consideration, I feel that in all probability I will be able to deal with it adequately by instructing the members of the jury in due course. that they must disregard that statement, and unless there is other evidence of excessive speed, to advise them that there would simply be no evidence upon which they could come to a conclusion that there was excessive speed, and indeed, if that's all the evidence that comes out in a trial with respect to speed, any finding by a jury of excessive speed in the circumstances would probably be perverse. It's with some reluctance that I have decided to direct that the trial continue with the jury. In doing so, I keep in mind Mr. FitzPatrick's opening motion, and it may be that as the trial proceeds, it may be a factor that I will consider at a later time in deciding whether or not the case should be tried with a jury. But I think at the moment, the interests of justice require that the case continue before this jury. Mr. Registrar, would you ask the jury to return, please?
Return the jurors to the jury box, please.
Mr. Galligan.
Thank you, Lord. Mrs. Paget, we had last spoken of your visits to your husband in a hospital, and you had indicated that on some occasions at least he was conscious.
Yes.
Would you tell his lordship and the jury the extent to which he was conscious? Was he aware of your being there when you visited him?
Of course he was. You see, perhaps what I didn't make clear to you was that just the year before that, we had celebrated our 25th silver wedding anniversary. So it was hard to believe that a year later, he's been hit by the car and stretched out like this. So we were reminiscing.
You talked of those matters?
The 25 years and what we were going to do and plan for the children and all the many things we said on that anniversary.
And did he talk lucidly, and was he well aware of what it was that you were talking about?
When I was with him, he knew I was with him. Mm-hmm. He knew it was me. He knew what he was discussing with me.
Had he a fair degree of medical and nursing attention while you were present?
Yes, the nurses were coming in and out, but you might say we were oblivious to all that.
Did you form any impression as to whether or not he was in pain during your visits to hospital?
Yes, he was in pain. He suffered a great deal, there's no question.
On what do you base that conclusion?
He told me how he was suffering and pain. And he hated me to be in the position to have to see him suffer like this. You've got to remember that this man, I only knew him as a very strong, healthy, vibrant man.
Had he been of a complaining nature before this accident?
If this man had anything to complain about, he certainly never told me. He did not ever believe. He kept things to himself. As they say, the man has never been ill, except that I know of, except common cold or the flu bug, when we'd all be down with it.
Were you with him when he died?
Thank God, yes, I was.
And at what point before that was he last conscious and aware of you and of what was going on about him?
You mean time-wise?
Was he conscious right to the end, or was there a period just before when he wasn't?
I would have to say that at the time he died, he was very much present with me, and he knew. Because his last words were...
Well, I think that
Sorry.
better avoid
Thank you, Mark.
conversations.
I'm sorry, Mother.
I have only one other question,
Yes.
and it deals with the situation as of today, and we've discussed that a little bit. And it's a question that's perhaps an embarrassing one to you to some extent, one perhaps that you haven't considered, but in any event, have you any inclination to remarry?
How could a woman like myself, who had a man like my husband, even think of anything like this? It's 6 months. I can't even believe if it's 60 years I'd ever find a man to replace my husband. No, I wouldn't think.
That's all I have, Lord.
Cross-examination.
My lord, I don't think I should commence my cross-examination of Mrs. Paget at the
Very
moment.
well. I think it'd be an appropriate time to take a brief adjournment. Adjourn for 10 minutes.
Court is adjourned for 10 minutes.
The jury would draw the inference case continue before this jury.
And how what we were going to do.